I'm Rob Skinner, and this is the Rob Skinner Podcast. If you're struggling or have ever struggled with the temptation toward pornography, you are definitely not alone. Statistics reveal that 68% of church-going men and over 50% of pastors view porn on a regular basis. Of young Christian adults, 18 to 24 years old, 76% actively search for porn. In this episode, originally published in 2022 in episode 150, I interviewed Jeff Hernandez, a disciple I've known for over 30 years. Of my 300 plus episodes, this is one of the most listened to episodes that I have, and it highlights the challenge of pornography and sexual addiction. Jeff shares about his descent into sexual addiction, his divorce from his wife of 22 years, his remarriage outside of the church, his recovery from a sexual addiction, the conversion of his second wife, his return to church, what he learned along the way, and how to overcome sexual temptation and addiction. All this and more on the Rob Skinner Podcast. Welcome back to the Rob Skinner Podcast. My goal is to inspire you to live a no-regrets life, make this life count, and multiply disciples, leaders, and churches. Merry Christmas 2024. It is December 15th as I'm recording this. I am so happy because my family is arriving into town. My daughter Ann is coming in this Friday. My son David's coming in Friday from Texas. My son James is here in town for just another week or so, and then he's moving to Boston. And so we're sad about that. There aren't going to be any more Skinner kids in Tucson after this week. We've got a big Christmas service planned for this next Sunday, which should be a lot of fun. And last night we had a banquet, which was just phenomenal. It was really, really amazing. We had a lot of people there, way over 100 people, probably about 125, I'd say. Great food. We met on campus at the Student Union. There's a grand ballroom that we met. We had a talent show. We had all these different performances. It was just a great, great time. And I really want to say a special thanks to Melanie Yu, who helped basically underwrite that whole event. That was really, really thoughtful. Thank you so much, Melanie, for help supporting that. Everyone was so, so grateful for your generosity. And we just had a great, great time. And I want to thank you for listening to the Rob Skinner Podcast this past year. It is so encouraging when I get calls from people saying, "Hey, I listened to your podcast helped me, man." That helps me when I have dark times, when I have days where I'm just feeling like, what am I doing? Am I doing anything good here? I get a call or an email from somebody, or I get support or something like that, and it makes my day. And if you feel like you're benefiting from the program, I'd like to ask you to support it with a gift, because your support enables me to multiply disciples, leaders, and churches, and inspire others to do the same through this podcast. All you need to do is simply go to the show notes in your player, and there's a link there that you just click on to support the program. Thank you so much. Jeff, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Ron. Great to be here.
It is great. I mean, we've known each other since Pam and I planned that church in Portland, Oregon back in 1991. I mean, we're going way back. That was my first church planting when I was 26, I guess.
We both had a lot more hair back then.
But I know you're going to share about that story. But sexual addiction is a huge issue. I just recently was talking about this on a Sunday, and some of the statistics are absolutely staggering. Over 40 million Americans are regular visitors to porn sites. The average visit lasts about 6 minutes, 6.5 minutes. There are around 42 million porn websites, which totals about 370 million pages of porn. The porn industry's annual revenue is more than the NFL, NBA, and Major League Baseball combined. It's also more than the combined revenues of ABC, CBS, and NBC. 47% of families in the United States reported that pornography is a problem in their home. Pornography use increases the marital infidelity rate by more than 300%. 11 is the average age that a child is first exposed to porn, and 94% of children will see porn by the age of 14. 56% of American divorces involve one party having an obsessive interest in pornographic websites. 70% of Christian youth pastors report they've had at least one teen come to them for help in dealing with pornography in the past 12 months. So, when I hear that statistic, Jeff, I just think, okay, 70% are hearing it, and then the other 30% are just keeping it quiet.
I know, right? That's funny. That's staggering.
Yeah, 68, this is the one that blew me away. 68% of church-going men and over 50% of pastors view porn on a regular basis. Of young Christian adults, 18 to 24, 76% actively search for porn. And I know for those listening, it's tempting to think, well, that's just a guy problem. It's the guys. This helped me. Said, is it just men? No. 17% of all women struggle with porn addiction. 20% of men and 13% of women admit to accessing porn while at work. So it's no longer just a guy problem. I mean, it's really crossing over. So that's what we're going to be talking about, Jeff. And I really appreciate your vulnerability and sharing your story, because I know people are very much impacted by your testimony. And so let's just go ahead and start. How'd you become a Christian?
Well, I was, you were there, but the church planting came in June, I believe, June of 1991. Right. Yep. And I was met on the streets of Portland in October, became a Christian in November of 91. So pretty shortly after the church planted, but pretty funny story. I'll make it brief, but this guy named Owen Hodovic, super great guy, super zealous. I was getting off work. I was in sales at the time, and I noticed that when I'd walk down the streets and I'd go by somebody, I'd look at them in the eyes, and then I would usually look away, and I'm in sales, and I'm like, why do I look away? Why don't I be more confident? I'm going to look at people in the eye, and they're going to look away. And so I went outside, I'm walking back to my car, and the first two people walked by, I looked at them in the eye, kind of smiled, and they looked away. I'm like, yes. And so here comes this guy, Owen Hodovic. He's a disciple, walking down the street, and we lock eyes probably about a block away. And I'm like, I'm not looking away. I'm not looking away. And of course, he's a disciple going, oh, he's looking at me. And we go up to each other and we just stop and we start looking at each other. And he's like, hi. I'm like, how you doing? And we just start having this conversation. And he hands me this card. He invites me to church. And you guys were doing a devotional called Radical Jesus. And you had these little tent cards printed out. And he gave me one of those. And I didn't go to the Friday night Devo, but I ended up going to church that Sunday. And all that week, I put that little Radical Jesus card on my desk, and I was making my sales calls, and I would just lean back and talk to people and look at the Radical Jesus. I was just thinking about it all week.
Right.
And started going to church, studied for a little while, met some great brothers, and became a disciple. Got baptized in November in the Willamette River.
Awesome.
A little cold outside, but It was awesome. And that was it.
Yeah,
it was great beginning.
That first 6 or 7 months that we were there, we left shortly after that. It seemed like years. I mean, so much happened during that time. It was such a great period, but that's a conversation for another story. Tell us a little bit about your early Christian life. What was it like over the next 10 or so years?
I think things went really well. I was an intern in the church for a year. I left the sales job and they asked me to go into the internship. So I worked for the church for a year. I think it went pretty good. Started leading the singles ministry. We had a lot of baptisms. There was a lot of people that we were able to impact and bring to God. And it was a beautiful church during that time. I mean, every church has problems, but it was a good beginning. I met a gal. We started dating. I was able to stay pure as a single man. We dated, got engaged, got married, had never slept together or touched each other inappropriately. And so it was a great start to that. And we had a couple kids. We had our first daughter, and then we moved to San Francisco in 2000. And so up to that point, we were basically just leading, Bible talks and house churches and church was doing, pretty good. We had a few ministers come and go, but overall the church, I think, was a pretty healthy place.
Okay, so you had a great start to your Christian life.
Yeah.
And then what happened? There was a turning point.
Yeah. So San Francisco, went to San Francisco, and I got into accounting, and I got a job in doing consulting. Didn't have a laptop, so there was a brother that ran an IT shop and said he had an extra one for me. And so I got the laptop and started typing in something, and then this link came up. And I knew in my gut, and I kind of looked at the title, I knew I shouldn't click on it, right? And I clicked on it, and it was a pornographic website. And so it was the first time, before then, internet was like just getting started. It's kind of hard to believe that, but back in the day, internet wasn't really around. So first time I saw internet pornography, and I got hooked. I got stuck. Started a habit, started a ritual, just kind of a devastating ritual of every 2 weeks, or maybe I'd go 2 months and pull it up again and look at it again. And I felt guilty, and I felt shame. And the one thing that I always am grateful for is I was really open about it. So I always talked about it and always confessed it, told my wife. And but I, no matter what I tried, I couldn't stop, and it continued on. And I tell you, it really did a number on my relationship with my wife at the time. It did a number on my relationship with God. I consider myself a prayer warrior. I used to go pray all the time. I can't tell you how many times I just prayed for God, like, God, just take this away from me. I hate this part of me, and I want to stop. And I just begged God to take it away from me. But it never left, right? Mm-hmm. I continued to act out on a regular basis, and yeah, I felt ashamed. I felt insecure and embarrassed. It's hard to, you have brothers in your life, right? And you call the brother, say, I'm having some temptations. He prays for you. You get off the phone, and then you have to call him the next day, say, I acted out yesterday, and it just hurt the relationships. People didn't know what to do, right? I got guys trying to be really loving, and just like, bro, I believe in you. And then you got other guys trying to rebuke you and, get the devil out of you. Right. You're like, bro, right. you're a sinner. You need to stop doing that. And, neither approach really worked. I think we do the best we can, but, people really aren't equipped to try to help people overcome addictions in the church. We got the Bible. Right. But, eventually I had a broken relationship with God. It wasn't working. Whatever I was doing wasn't working, and I was stuck.
So what were the consequences? What happened? That was the year 2000. What happened over the next 15 years or so?
Mm-hmm. So we moved back to Portland eventually. We moved to the Bay Area for a couple of reasons. One, to help out the Marin sector. Lee and Rhonda Deloney were leading that, and they knew we had some family in the area. So that was the other part of why we went there, as my wife at the time had some family in the Bay Area. So we went to be close to them and help the church, and so that was great. But then the church in Portland started doing pretty bad, and they were looking for some couples to move back. And we were kind of in a place financially, we weren't doing that great, and there's no way we were going to be able to afford a house. And so we they thought of us actually and said, hey, how are you guys doing here? And we're like, well, it's okay, but we've been thinking about maybe moving back to Portland. And they're like, wow, perfect. We're looking for couples to move back. So we came back, and the church had gone through a lot. The couple that was leading stepped out of the ministry, or stepped out of leading there. And then Portland kind of didn't have somebody leading the church, and had just gone through a lot. And that was the time actually that Kip McKean was asked to come and interview, and he came and took over the church. So that was kind of interesting, like, oh, Kip McKean's coming to lead the church. That's kind of interesting. And so he came back. And so personally, I was still struggling a lot with my addiction again. And, didn't matter who my discipling partner, actually Kip discipled me for a while. And then Steve Johnson, when he came, he took over and he discipled me also. So had some pretty good discipling partners trying to help me with this problem. And I wasn't able to stop. Did a lot of damage to my wife at the time. She went from, again, being super like, hey, I love you, I support you, I'm here for you, to just like, I'm tired of hearing about this. Go talk to the brothers. You know what I mean? This is really old. I'm going to say this. One of the things that we actually talked to some elders. They came and did a marriage retreat for us. And one of the things they were talking to the sisters about is, sisters, you need to love your husbands. You need to have sex with them and help them so they don't struggle with their purity, And we pulled them aside and talked to them afterwards, because what I now know and what we believed at the time is it's really not up to the wives to help their husbands stay pure. I mean, it is helpful to have a good relationship with your spouse, but my wife at the time was very giving, and she would give, and we'd have a nice relationship, and then the next day I would act out, so. She felt a lot of pressure. She's like, I'm doing the best I can. I'm giving as much as I can, but then I come home and tell her I acted out and looked at pornography. That didn't really help our intimacy very much. It didn't really help her to want to give to me again, because here I was looking at other women. So that teaching was really hurtful, and we tried to just share that whenever we could. It's like, it's not really up to her to try to keep me sober. That's really my job, in sobriety. Things continued to escalate, and eventually, my wife at the time asked for a separation. This was probably like 2015. And so we separated for a year, and, the goal was for us to just work on ourselves, try to get sober. And I had met some guys. I met a guy named Matt Burton, and Matt was doing work with a nonprofit called Helping Men Heal. And he came and spoke at a Christian breakfast that I went to one time. And he was talking about how there's a lot of resources for women who have gone through trauma, but there's really not very many for men who have gone through trauma. And he started talking a lot about male trauma. And I started thinking about my past. And I'm like, man, I've been through a lot. My dad was super abusive. He was super physically abusive and emotionally abusive and just not super close. I had some issues with ADHD, so school was really hard for me. I'd come home with 2 Ds and 2 Cs and a B, and I just feel like garbage,
right?
And super just down on myself, and just like, man, I get in trouble for acting out in class a lot, trying to be funny and get people to like me and say funny stuff. And I would come home with a bad report card feeling like junk, and he would beat me with a belt. He's like, man, you're doing terrible, and why can't you be like your brother? You get good grades, and so it just created this insecurity in me. This shame and insecurity. It made me feel. He didn't make me feel that way, but the way I felt was like, I'm inadequate. I'm less than most other guys. And so, anyways. This guy, Matt, was talking about male trauma, and I started thinking, because for a long time I just thought, well, that's normal. My dad disciplined us.
Right.
But I started thinking, and then I also started going to therapy and realizing, no, that's not normal. That's not a normal way to treat your child. You know what I'm saying? So I had to realize that that was not right. So, but Matt eventually introduced me to a 12-step program, SA. And I started going to SA, and that was the first time I entered into recovery. And so it was really helpful. But it did create some longer term sobriety. I think I got like 6 months and 9 months one time. But when we went into our separation, I was really, I could make it maybe 60 days, but then have a relapse. And then eventually after a year, her therapist that she was working with and my former spouse, they basically said, look, we're going to give you an ultimatum. We feel that after a year, if you cannot maintain sobriety, you're probably not going to change. And so we're going to get back together in 90 days. And if you haven't been sober, I'm going to recommend that your wife files for divorce. Of course, I made it about 45 days. I had a relapse. And, I was honest with them. I said, I relapsed after 45 days, and surprise, surprise, she filed for divorce, and that was that. So,
okay, let me just stop you right there. I mean, how were you feeling? I mean, you're converted in the kingdom, mm-hmm. You'd kept it pure, and all of a sudden, your wife's saying, "I want to." What was going through your mind?
Yeah, well, at the time, I was begging her to keep going. I'm like, we can do this. I know I can do this. I know we can work through this. Please don't do this. You know, I really was desperate and trying. Looking back, I mean, I don't blame her. You know, she really went through a lot. She was there for me for a lot. We were married for 22 years. And, 15 of those I was acting out. So, came to a point where she had to be strong and say, you're not changing, and that's, I care about you, and, it has nothing to do with my love for you. It just has to do with, I can't keep doing this, Right. And that's the other thing right now, like my wife right now, we are recovery coaches, and she helps the women who are married to addicts. And I think that was maybe one of the missing pieces. She did have a counselor she was going to, but I think that's one of the resources that's really missing is for a lot of these women, they don't know how do I help my husband? What do I do? Should I be hard with them? Should I be loving to them? Should I keep having a lot of sex with them, or should I not have sex with them? They don't really know. They don't really have a plan. So they need a program just like men need a program.
Right.
Or vice versa. If the other one is an addict, it doesn't really matter. So,
okay. So she filed for divorce. You guys got divorced. Mm-hmm. What was it? Were you still going to church at that time? What was going on?
Yeah. So that was 2016. That was the hardest year of my life. That was the hardest year of my life by far. So super awkward. We both were still going to the Portland church at that time. I would go, sit in a pew up front or to the left, and people would come like, "Oh, where's your wife?" I'm like, "Well, Mika's back there. She's not my wife anymore. We got a divorce," and that was, we didn't really announce it in church, so had to kind of tell the story over and over again. I was like in my late 40s, I'm like, do I start going to the singles ministries now? Like it just, oh my gosh. They were all college age, singles and, younger singles, and there's a few older ones, but it just like, I felt like I didn't belong anywhere. I didn't belong, I wasn't going to go to the marriage ministries anymore. I think they had a marriage retreat coming up, and I'm just like, I'm not going to that,
Right.
But I didn't feel super comfortable with the singles either. I think during that time, the church, honestly, I'm not going to talk too much about the church, but it wasn't super encouraging for me. I would go, and I was really hurting bad. And, I'm starting to miss church a bit, and I was still going to recovery during that time, but then I'd go to church and I would leave feeling more discouraged than I came. And so eventually I stopped. I know that I was, and then I was still in recovery for a little while, but honestly, I felt super defeated. I was mad at God. Mm-hmm. I was disappointed by God. I'm just like, God, I don't know what I can, I don't know how many more times I can pray or ask you for help. And like, nothing's changing, and I was mad at the elders. I was mad at the church leaders. I was mad at everybody for not helping me,
right.
But I think people just do the best they can to help you. But I didn't really have the solutions at the time. So eventually I stopped going to church, and eventually in 2016 I just said, forget it. Why am I going to all these meetings and stuff? Like, who cares? And so I stopped going to recovery as well. So that's kind of when my addiction went a little deeper, and I got into online dating. I just was super lonely, and started going out to bars and stuff like that, and felt awkward. I was just this older guy. I felt like an old man,
Right.
And, so I was doing a lot of dating. I was going out with non-Christian women. And I was trying to stay somewhat connected to the church, you know what I mean? But I'd go, so every once a month I'd show up at the church. And again, it was just kind of not a super encouraging situation. So I'm just like, God, why don't I keep coming back here? It's not working for me, not helping me. I was trying to get, I know there's a couple singles websites through the church, and so I joined one of those and started having some conversations with sisters, but I just wasn't really making too many connections that were super encouraging for me. I met some great sisters, and we had some great talks over the phones, but it was kind of like, there's a sister in Russia. She's like, you should come visit. I can't afford to go to Russia, but, anyways. So I tried that, but I wasn't really in a great spot spiritually. I was just really down. And so yeah, I just got into a mess, and just, it got worse before it got better.
Okay. So at that point, you just basically gave yourself over to it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I just said, stop fighting it.
Okay. So can you tell me what happened? Like how long was that period? What was involved? What were you doing during that time?
So probably for the next 3 years. So from 2016 to 2019, I just said, I'm just going to go for it. So the main thing, so dating kind of became my entertainment. I just went out on a lot of dates. Sometimes just a one-time date or whatever. And then, I got, I had a series of girlfriends during that time. My addiction expressed itself a little differently. I was having, sex with women and just, I didn't really care, I was afraid, because I would still pray on occasion and still be like, man, if I die right now, I know I'm living in sin right now. I am not right with God. So I was afraid. And so I kind of had like, 1 foot in, 1 foot out, you know what I mean? But I was all in my addiction. And then maybe my small toe was in, church, right? So I'd go to church every once in a while. I was kind of looking for some solutions. I started going to like another Church of Christ in town, and that was okay. But, there's no place like home, there's no place like the kingdom of God. And so I'd visit these other places, and it'd be an okay service. It'd be pretty inspiring, but, it was hard to meet people. Nobody ever really reached out to me, and I learned a lot about going through divorce, how much people need other people in their life. It's kind of interesting because I never felt more alone, but every once in a while somebody would call me out of the blue and just be like, hey, I've been thinking about you. I just want to see how you're doing. There were a couple brothers and sisters that were going to Iceland in 2017, and they needed one more guy. And they called me up and they said, hey, Jeff, we know, you're a little older than the average person going on this trip, but you have that awesome spirit about you, and we'd love for you to come. And so I went on this really great trip to Iceland in 2017. And it's those little memories I have of the people that showed up for me, that were there for me, regardless of how bad things were going for me, personally, spiritually. I really meant a lot. And so I think about that now too, when I hear about people going through like a divorce or something really hard. I always try to make the phone call and reach out to them. And because I know it's hard to pick up that phone. I needed help. I needed people there. And I just didn't have the ability to pick up the phone and call people for help, And so it was really great that people were willing to do that for me. But so yeah, that went until about 2019. I basically was just out there, and I created a lot of problems. I did a lot of damage. A lot of it was selfish. Sometimes I was using women. Sometimes they were using me. I'd meet gals that I really liked, and I realized, God, they just wanted to have sex with me. They used me, and that it hurt. But I was kind of doing the same thing sometimes, and it changed. It started changing in 2019. I met somebody that I really liked. She was great. We started developing feelings for each other, and I started dating her. And typically I would, I had a few girlfriends, and they lasted about 2 to 3 months, and it was like, all right, I'm out of here, But I started being a little more picky. I started, after about 3 years, I started getting kind of tired. It's like, it's a lot of emotional energy. It's a lot of money on happy hour. You know what I'm saying? I'm going broke here.
Right.
And I really did want to start settling down. And I met somebody that was really great. And I'm like, I really liked her. I told her that we probably wouldn't work out because on her profile, she said, I'm not really religious. I don't know that I really, I'll ever be really religious. And so I was like, I started kind of looking for more like Christian women,
Right.
As fun, as weird as that sounds. But I was willing to go out with her, I thought she was attractive and she seemed kind of cool. And so we went out and hit it off really well and built this relationship, and we started dating, and it's sort of my disclosure to her was kind of a slow process. You don't really put on your profile, I'm a sex addict, like that doesn't really get you dates very well. So you kind of have to keep that on the down low. But eventually what it was is she was married to a guy who, after I don't know how long after, but the last, I think, 10 to 15 years of their marriage, he became an alcoholic. And so she kind of had to deal with that. And then, that's why she left. They were married for like 24 years. And so she was talking about alcoholism, and I started, I had in my recovery, I was going to SA meetings, which is a 12-step group that is founded by the AA group.
And what's SA?
Oh, SA stands for Sexaholics Anonymous.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's a 12-step program that's just like AA, or was basically founded by AA members. So we kind of follow the same model. But I had gone also I would go to AA meetings because, part of my recovery, I was going to like 90 meetings in 90 days. I was going to a meeting every single day. And so sometimes I would, time-wise, I'm like, oh, shoot, I forgot to go to my other meetings. And so I'd go hit an AA meeting. And, I'm not an alcoholic, but I would kind of identify as being an addict alcoholic, and check in. Anyhow, so I read the big book, the Alcoholics Anonymous book that they have, and it's an amazing book, and has really taught me a lot. And so I started talking to her about alcoholism, like, well, why alcoholics do this, don't you? And she's like, no. So I started telling her, she's like, that's amazing. That's really helpful. How do you know that? And I'm like, well, I went to some 12-step programs in the past, and, I've had some issues around addiction, and so it's kind of a slow reveal, and eventually I told her, there were things in my life I was doing that I didn't like, mostly pornography, so I would look at pornography and not feel good about it. And so I started going to a 12-step program for that, so she's like, oh, okay, cool. And then, so we, our relationship continued, but then I came home one day from work and told her, this was probably after dating her for probably about 6 months or 9 months. I'm like, I'm feeling guilty because she was being all lovey-dovey, and I kind of was feeling distant, and she's like, what's the matter? And I'm like, well, I looked at pornography today on my phone, while I was at work. And she looked at me and she's like, it kind of, the light bulb went off. She's like, you're a sex addict, aren't you? Still. I'm like, I just had to admit it. I'm like, yep, I am. I mean, it slowed down when we were together, but it was still there, it didn't go away. And time doesn't make addictions go away. They may sleep for a while, but they're always there. So that's when I came back into recovery, because I knew, I'm like, if I'm ever going to want a relationship long term, and especially things were going really well, I'm like, man, this woman's amazing. I can see a future with her. And I knew I had to get sober. I knew it. And she was like, she just looked at me. She was like, I don't know if I can do this. I just got out of a relationship. I just got out of my marriage. She had been divorced about a year and a half. And she's just like, I don't think I want to go back there again. You better get some help. Right. So I'm like, okay, I'll get some help.
And so you guys were living together at this time?
Yeah.
Okay. So you've been living together for a little while, and that's when you brought it out, like, okay, I got an issue. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. Once she was in and no backing out, she's like, great, I fell in love with you. Now you tell me. So
right, okay, so she's emotionally connected to you at this point. You're living together. There's definitely a bond.
Right, exactly. Okay, so that's what. So I end up calling this guy Matt Burton, who I mentioned, and it's kind of like you, actually. You two are very similar. I'd call you like every 5 years, check in, like, hey, bro, doing awesome. Like, hey, bro, I'm not doing very good, but how are you? I think I came and visited you once in Ashland.
It was awesome.
I wasn't doing that great, but it was great to see you guys and have fellowship. But anyway, I called Matt and I talked to him, and I told him, I'm like, hey, I'm going back to SA. I'm going to give that a shot. But part of me was a little bit scared because I know I had been in SA before and I wasn't able to stay sober. So I'm like, well, okay, I guess I'll go back. It's the only thing I can really think of. But I called Matt just to chat with him about it. And he said, funny enough, we actually left the nonprofit. It's still going, but we've stepped down. And what I'm doing now is I'm starting to do addiction recovery coaching. And I just went through, so he studied through a program with a company called AASAT, which is American Association of Sex Addiction Therapists. There's a therapist named Dr. Doug Weiss, He's really well known in the sexual addiction recovery community. Been a therapist for like 30 years. Has a super well known practice. Written like 40, 50 books. And he started a program to train therapists and counselors on how to help people overcome sexual addiction. So he's training people to help them. Because to be honest with you, a lot of therapists out there, they do a lot of great work, counselors, but they're not really equipped to know, how do I help somebody overcome sexual addiction? So a lot of times you go to a therapist and they don't really know what to do exactly. So he developed a whole program, and he's helped so many, hundreds of thousands of people overcome sexual addiction. So he's got a coaching platform that he does. So if somebody doesn't want to go back and get their master's degree, they can just become a coach. So Matt told me about this program. Sounds great. He's like, it's just like individual counseling. We meet, have individual sessions, and I also have these work groups that I do. We meet once a week and just check in, and they work really well. So I'm like, all right, sign me up. So I signed up, and then as well, my wife, his wife works with the women or spouses to help them. And that was really helpful for my wife as well, because she was able to really work through some codependency issues she had. She didn't really realize, but she was, very codependent from her prior relationship and with me as well. And she had to learn how to set proper boundaries and how to deal, with the trauma of a spouse being an addict. She had to learn, how to deal with that. So she started getting help. I started getting help. We'd have a couple of sessions together. We'd have individual sessions, and I started doing the work groups, and I was going to the 12-step program, SA. And the combination of those two, it worked.
Wow.
It worked. The last time I acted out was January of 2021. I got
Awesome.
sober.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. It's awesome.
So, yeah, so we've been working with Matt ever since, and just a wonderful program. And
okay, so
yeah.
So you're in this relationship. You're living in sin, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
but you're recovering. What happened? Okay, how'd you navigate this new relationship with non-Christian wife, doesn't like God, or doesn't indifferent toward God? I guess it's probably easier to say. What happened?
So yeah, some amazing things happened, I guess, once I made the decision to start coming back to recovery. God always works on you. Even when you're gone, he's working on you. And so some really cool things happened. So one, my girlfriend, I guess at the time, she started seeing me reading my Bible and started seeing me read recovery material. She'd come out and I was reading my Bible. She's like, "What are you reading?" And I'm like, "I'm reading the Bible." And she's like, "Well, tell me about it." And she was really interested. And she said she was a Christian and a believer and all that, and wasn't really active in church, but she'd never really read the Bible. So I started telling her stories and talking to her about the Bible, and she just soaked it up. And so that was a really cool thing. So, so I took her to church. I took her to a Church of Christ in town, and she was like, "We're not going back there. That place is boring." It's like, okay. So we started kind of looking for places, but what we started doing is watching the Bay Area church online. So we started watching the San Francisco, and she got hooked on Russ. Russ is such a great speaker. She's like, "Oh my gosh, I love that guy. This is so awesome." They got such a great service. And so we did that for like a whole year. That's what we were doing during quarantine. And then we both started going into recovery. And I also was spiritually, we were doing that, but we were also doing a house church with some brothers in town. There's a brother named Richard Quilly. Hey, Richard, hope you don't mind me saying your name, but he was having a house church. And so that was actually, Richard was one of those guys that were just there for me the whole time. Even in my darkest moments, he was still there and loved up on me. And we would get together and talk, and, he would share scriptures or just encourage me. We'd sing a lot of karaoke together. So that was awesome. I got pretty good at karaoke, by the way. But Richard was having a house church, so we started going to that also, and they became really good friends with both of us. And I slowly started coming back to God, and the program helped. Getting sober really helped. and Richard helped, and we did some studies, and I don't know if there's anything out there that's restoration studies. I didn't do anything like that, but we did talk, and one of the things that happened was I knew in my heart, like the first time I got married, was totally pure, and this one I know was totally different route, and felt kind of guilty about that. So I asked we got engaged, and I asked my fiance, I'm like, hey, can we have a period of abstinence before we get married? Mm-hmm. I think that'd be really special. And so we did. We stopped sleeping together, and I moved into a different room. We were in the same house. And we had about 2.5 months of being apart and just working on recovery and working on our program, working on a relationship with God. And it was a tough time. It was hard once you go there and then you stop all of a sudden. It was really difficult, but it was the right thing to do, and it felt really awesome about going into our marriage. I did a lot of interesting work on kind of breaking the bonds of the other women that I had slept with. I did a lot of in recovery, we do these thank you goodbye letters. So I thanked them, thank you for what you gave me at the time, and said goodbye. I can no longer, think about you, fantasize about you, or, have a bond with you in any way. And just really prayed for God to break all those bonds so I can go into my relationship with my wife, in our marriage, being pure. So I don't know if it worked, but it felt good to do it.
Right.
And it felt like a piece of repentance to do that. So, right. So we got married in June of 2021. And the other amazing thing that happened is my wife just, she asked for a Bible. We went and bought her a Bible at Powell's. And then I started doing Bible studies with her. And then Richard and Connie Quilley helped to study with her as well. And my wife was baptized. She said she wanted to get baptized. We did a cross study, and she was... we were just bawling together, talking about Jesus. She fell in love with God, and she fell in love with Jesus, and she got baptized in July of 2021.
Oh, wow, that is incredible. That's just an amazing story.
Yeah. I like to say, don't try this trick at home, kids. I wouldn't recommend the route I went, but it was the route that I was on. Right. And we serve a merciful God, and I can't explain it. He's just been really good to me, even despite of just my stumbling around and just my ways. He's always there when we decide to come back to him. You read the story of the prodigal son, you're like, oh, that's a great story, but when you live it and you come back to God and you're just like, I'm here for you. It's amazing. It's amazing.
Okay. And so where are you at now spiritually? What church are you a part of? What are you doing right now?
Yeah. I knew that we need fellowship. This is the Bay Area thing worked for a while. Then when they started meeting in person, their services got a little shorter. And again, we kind of started looking, but really what happened is I started praying, again, the Portland church, I really love the folks that are there and leading the church, but it just seemed like it wasn't the right place for me to go back to. It just seemed like it wasn't doing great, and some different teachings going on there now. And I just was like, we can't go back. I can't go there, And so we started praying. And what happened was a brother called me and said, hey, we're Kelly Boyd, who leads the Eugene church, is coming to town, and he wants to get together with anybody who wants to meet with him and just have some fellowship, and he's thinking about, maybe having like a house church or something like that. And I said, that sounds great. So this brother told me about that. So we went and met with Kelly, and there was maybe about a dozen of us or so, like 12 of us. And he just wanted to hear our stories. And he said, yeah, I've been really thinking about the Portland church and the Portland area. I know there's a lot of disciples here. And some of the things that were happening in Portland, he just felt like maybe there's people that need support. And we did, right? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, we're still we found a couple to take over the Eugene church, and that kind of frees us up. But we're still going to church there on Sundays, but we'd like to come here on Saturdays. And if you guys are interested, we can have like a house church or something. So we had the first couple house churches at our house, and then we started meeting. We just found a park that has like a indoor area that we can meet at. So we've been having church services there. I got, with so few people, I got involved. I'm the song leader now. And that's how desperate we are. But, the karaoke paid off, I guess. So I started singing songs, and we created a board. I'm one of the board members of the church. We started a church called the Bridge Church of Christ. I filed the federal tax ID and the Oregon registration, and so we are an official church now. It's pretty small, so anybody out there in Portland would like to come. We are meeting on Saturdays at 2:30. My little commercial there, but yeah, we started a little church, and it's just been encouraging. It's a great little church. Again, there's probably like 5 couples that come right now, and I'm going to I'm not going to say everybody's name, but Greg Dixon is going, who's the brother that was baptized on the same exact day I was.
Wow. Back
in 1991. So
that's crazy.
That's awesome. He's going too. So it's great to reconnect with him.
Okay. I'm interested in just kind of focusing more now, Jeff, on just how a person can get help. Okay. You've gone through just the ringer, and it's quite a journey, and yet God's worked, and that's pretty exciting. It's really inspiring. But I'm one of the things that I thought of is like, how do you define being sober? You use that term. I hear sober, and I think about alcohol. But how do you define it in terms of sexual addiction?
Yeah. So in terms of the definition of sobriety, it sort of depends on which group you go to. But for me, when I joined the SA, they define what sobriety is, so I don't have to think about it. But basically, it's no sex with yourself or no sex with anyone outside of your marriage, so your spouse. So that's what they consider to be sober. There's a little thing that people in our program even kind of forget to read, but the second part of that is and progressive victory over lust. So actually, some guys could go to the program and look at pornography, but if they don't masturbate or have sex with somebody, they still consider themselves sober, but that's kind of silly, right? So you can also add in some additional things. So for me, I consider myself sober if I didn't look at pornography or masturbate or have sex with somebody.
Okay.
So that's why the last time I looked at pornography was in 2021, January, but I don't consider my sobriety date until April because I was sleeping with my fiance at the time. So my true sobriety date is the day that we stopped sleeping together in April.
Okay. How do you define an addiction? How do you know when you go, okay, I've crossed the line, I actually have an addiction here?
Right. That's a tough one, right? And there's only one person that can really say that you're an addict, and that has to be yourself, right? So, and the problem is that most people who have an addiction don't want to admit it. Right. They don't want to face the fact that they, and that was hard for me too, right? I would go to the 12-step programs. I'm like, these guys are pretty messed up,
Right.
Cheated on their spouse or got into prostitution or, voyeurism or child pornography or whatever. And I didn't do all that stuff. But, so it's hard to say, I'm an addict. It was hard to admit it. I'm a lot more comfortable now saying I'm a sex addict. I got a bumper sticker that says I'm a sex addict. No, I'm just joking. I don't go to that length, but I'm a lot more comfortable with just admitting it. And when I think about addiction, what I think of is 2 things. One, there's something that I'm doing that I don't want to do, but I can't stop. So for me, it had to be, is there something I'm doing that I don't want to do, but I can't stop it, And the second part of that is doing something that has adverse consequences if I do it, but I still do it anyways. Mm-hmm. And I think back when I really realized I have an addiction, it's when I lost a job because I looked at pornography at work. I mean, that was super embarrassing, and came home with a box of all my stuff, had to walk in my door and tell my family and my wife that I lost my job because I looked at pornography at work. And I was unemployed for 2 months, and then this was when I was in accounting, and then I got another job, which was a better job as a controller. I had a team I was managing, and after about 2 months on the job, I was working late one day, and I don't know what was going on, but I gave in and I looked at pornography at a work computer there. And I'm just driving home, just shaking my head going, what is wrong with me? Mm-hmm. Why would I risk this great job I just got? I don't get it. And so I knew at that point, I have a problem, and I think I had been acting out for about 5 years up to that point or so, maybe 7 years. And so I knew for me, like I knew I got a problem with this, and
okay. So I'm sure there's people, it's a continuum, right? You've got people on the extreme side, and then you've got people dabbling in it, and then you've got everything in between. What about a person listening and they've been a Christian a year or 2 or 3 or 5 or whatever? Mm-hmm. They're not into it every day, but it's comes up with regularity over the course of like 3 years. It's pretty consistent. Sure. It's like every 30 days or every 3 weeks. It's like, oh, I'm feeling that need and to get into it, but they don't want to say I'm an addict. Mm-hmm. They don't feel like I'm that far into it, but at the same time, it's an issue.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
What do you do in that situation?
Well, that's, it's an interesting question because it's hard when you're there, it's every addict's, and I'm not going to say that these people are addicts, right? But it's every addict's wish to control and enjoy their addiction without having to call themselves an addict, right? So it's kind of like alcoholics, before they really admit that they're a true alcoholic, they try all sorts of different stuff. I'm going to just drink beer, I'm going to just drink hard liquor, or I'm only going to drink on the weekends. And so we go through this process of trying all these things, all these gyrations to stop this behavior, but it doesn't work, And so I think that's kind of the point where you have to look at it and say, are there things happening that is there a cycle that you can look at? For me, it took a long time, it took a while, and it's, the problem is you can go 2 months maybe, and be fine, but then all of a sudden, bam, it just hits you out of nowhere. And you're like, I was doing so good,
Right, exactly.
And so it's confusing and frustrating. But what I also learned is that there's a lot of different types of addictions, sexual addictions. And so like one of them is a biological addiction. And so once we train our brain and we get used to receiving pleasure a certain way, and we repeat that over and over again, even though it may be every couple months, it does create these neurological pathways, and it does change us physically. It is just like a drug addiction. The high that we get from sexual addiction is a drug addiction. All the chemicals that get triggered and fired in your brain, it creates an addiction. So when that's happening, people need a plan. We need a program to change. So there's tools that they can get, and the thing that happens also, sometimes people will maybe not be too bad, and they'll go to a program like a 12-step program, and then they go maybe once or twice, and they're like, I don't know, that's weird. I have to say I'm a sex addict when I right. and introduce my name, right. and I don't know that I'm a sex addict, and maybe they go to a meeting that's kind of weird, and guys are older. I don't know, right. They just can't relate, right. And so then they don't go back, right? And that's fine. And in the AA, when the early years of AA first started, it was only the really hard cases that would get sober, because they were homeless and everything was a wreck, right? But if you read the foreword to the big book, it explains how after many years, guys would come and by hearing the stories of the older alcoholics and how their lives were kind of manageable at some points, but then they got drunk over time and then they lost everything, they could kind of see the vision, like, here's where I am now, but if I keep drinking the way I am, right. I can see that's where I'm going to end up.
Right.
And so for some folks, if they're having repeated relapses, but the rest of their life is still functioning, I say, amen. I'm glad that life is still going well, but if there's something that's happening, you can't stop, just keep going. Keep going if you don't think there's a problem, and let's give it another year and see what happens. Wow. You know what I mean? So that's what the old timers say is go out there and, okay, you don't have a problem. Great. Go out there and do some more research and development and see, we'll see you in a year and see how it is.
Exactly. I hate to laugh. It's just,
yeah.
Now, what happened? What about a person who's in a relationship with someone, and how can you tell the signs of a person who's really struggling in this area, whether it's a husband or whether it's a roommate? Like what should a person be looking for?
Well, yeah. So if it's kind of different, right? If it's a husband or a wife, and so the thing that we do, what's interesting is that I think God gives us a conscience, and God gives us the spirit in us, right? So my wife kind of always knew, and I was terrible at hiding my guilt and shame. So and even my current spouse now, like she knows when she walks in the door, and she's like, "What's wrong?" I'm like, "Nothing." She's like, "What's wrong?" Nothing. I'm not acting out the same way, but I still have daily I still have challenges, right? I still have temptations, and I still have down days where the temptations are strong, and I'm fighting, and I may not have given in, but but sometimes if I'm not having a great day, she just knows it. So I think the first thing is just, you got to go with your gut, especially if you're married to somebody. Second thing is just, you can ask them directly, The thing that we do also in my program and when I first started getting coached is we did a polygraph test. And I know that sounds maybe a little harsh, but so here my wife was about to get married to a guy who says, "Oh yeah, I haven't looked at porn and done anything since January." And how do you believe somebody who has a sexual addiction history? There's really only one way to really know. And so what we incorporate with married couples is to go through a polygraph test.
Wow.
And yeah, it was intense.
Wow.
They strap you up, we go through scripted questions. And so here are the 5 questions that your fiance wants to know. Have you made contact with any of your old girlfriends? Have you slept with anybody since you've been intimate with her and been exclusive with her? So I went through those, and I passed, of course, but funny enough, a lot of people don't pass. A lot of people that say they're sober and say, "Yeah, no, I have not been doing anything." There's signs, and it's hard, because some people are really good at hiding this stuff, and so those are some of the things that we can do. But at the end of the day, you really don't know, But honesty is really one of the keys to sobriety and to getting well, is being willing to be honest with others and honest with yourself.
Yeah.
I was pretty good at lying to myself. I was pretty good at lying to God. And
so one of the there were so many great responses from your short testimony at the retreat. One of the things that was really touching to me is there was a guy that came up to me and he just said, "I've struggled with this for years. And at times I lose hope." And he said that you really gave him a lot of hope. Mm-hmm. What would you say to a person? This has been a long time challenge. Mm-hmm. Can a person really change? It seems from your story, I think that's what's inspiring, but what would you say to that person?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the consequences to acting out a lot is the shame and the guilt that goes with that. Here I was, I love God, and I was doing the best I could, but every time you fall short, you just feel like you're letting God down. And so one of the mind shifts I had to make is, I'm not a bad person trying to get good. I'm a sick person trying to get well. And so one of the things that I tried to share with the brothers, like, you're not a bad guy. You're sick. If this is something that's happening in your life, you need help. You need a plan, right? And again, you would think, we have the Bible, we have God, we have prayer, and you'd think that would work and be enough. But for me, it wasn't. I needed something more. If my relationship with God was good enough to get me sober, I wouldn't have needed something else, but I needed something else. And I think a lot of brothers and sisters probably do also. So that's the first thing, is like, let's just get rid of the shame and guilt, but let's get a plan, right? One of the ways that we can really lie to ourselves, one of the biggest lies we can tell ourselves is, I can handle it.
Right. Okay.
So I was talking to some brothers that love Facebook, right? I can't go on Facebook. I can't go on Instagram. I had to get rid of those accounts, and just they're just too triggering for me. I'm very stimulated by computers and phones and all that, images. And so for me, I had to really make some hard decisions, and it was tough. I had to mourn the loss of my Instagram account. I loved it. Man, I had all my concerts on there that I went to, and all my selfies when I was single, but I had to delete it and just say, I can't go there. I can't. So we're really good at lying to ourselves and telling ourselves we can handle certain things that we can't. And so part of the recovery work is just being accountable and setting boundaries and just saying, if this is how you, where does your cycle start? What's kind of the beginning process of it? It could just be because it's Tuesday and why not? You know what I mean?
Right.
So there's not always a reason, but sometimes, for me, I just got to limit my screen time. I got to limit how much time I'm on the internet.
Okay. So that's one, just limit your screen time. You shared some hacks or some tips. I know that we don't have time to do a complete, that's why you're doing the coaching, is to give so much help, but can you just give some starting tips? So
sure.
How do you even just get a handle on sexual purity if you've been struggling with it?
Well, one of the things that people think we do to help is to try to help them stop acting out. And that's not really what we do. We try to help people not start acting out. Because just like an alcoholic, if they have one drink, they're going to get drunk, right? Mm-hmm. And so for somebody who's struggled with their purity, we have to be convinced that we cannot handle a drink. I am like an alcoholic. My drink is looking at something. So I cannot handle it, and so for me, I'm very diligent now about what I look at, and just so like I'm driving down the road. And maybe there's a billboard that's really provocative, right? And you just kind of look up and you notice it and you look away, and it could just be a split second. And then my addict brain says, that looks pretty good. Why don't you have another look, right? And if I looked back at it, that would be my first drink. So just seeing something isn't my first drink. Looking back at it a second time is my first drink. Unless the first time I look at it, I pause for like 10 seconds, then I'd be drinking, right? Mm-hmm. So I have to be convinced that I cannot handle it. And that's the 12-step program. The first step is I'm powerless over my lust, and my life has become unmanageable. So if I know I'm powerless over it, I need to be honest with myself that I can't handle taking the first drink. And so, sometimes you see something that's just triggering and all of a sudden you got the obsession, the temptations are coming, and that's when I need to go to work. So first thing I do is I pray. I have a very specific prayer I do that is really good. It's a 3-step prayer, but the first part of it, and I'll share it with you, but the first part of it has a word in it that really was kind of one of the keys to my sobriety, and it's called the word surrender. Fighting addiction does not work. Trying harder does not work. I don't know how many times I've gotten advice like, bro, you just need to try harder. It's kind of like working with somebody who's got a depression. You don't tell them, bro, you need to try harder to be in a better mood. Like, okay, that doesn't, thank you, bro. That's not very helpful. I'm down, like I'm depressed. It's like, there's a physical and neurological problem happening right here. And, trying harder is not going to solve it. Same with sexual addiction. So the word is surrender. It's me. I prayed wrong so many times for God, please take this away. I wanted him to do the taking away. And I had to realize I had to be the one giving it up. I had to be the one saying, God, I can't handle this. You know it, I know it. So I give it to you. I give up my right to look back at that billboard. And I'm not going to do it. And I'm going to surrender. So I surrender my right, God, to look at that billboard. Or let's say it's a person, right? So the second part is I pray for that person. God, I pray for them. I pray for this individual. I pray that she has great relationships. I pray for her, to do well financially. I pray that she finds you, God, that somehow she could seek you and find you. Mm-hmm. And the third step is, God, I pray for myself that you would fill me and give me what I'm looking for in my lust. I pray that you would help me to find what's missing right now and the reason why I want to look back, whatever it is. I pray that you would give me that.
Right. I thought that was so powerful when you shared that, because there is something driving us, and just that third prayer really kind of hit me.
The other thing I got to do is I got to get on the phone. I got to get I part of the benefits of the recovery program is you build a big group of people around you that are in recovery, and so I make a lot of calls every day. I make 2 to 5 calls, and got people calling me. Already have taken a couple calls today, guys just checking in and calling you. And by being close to these guys, I can call them anytime, and if they're not around, I just keep calling. and you just talk it out. If I take it in, I got to get it out. I'm like, hey, if let's say I did take a first drink at that billboard, I would call and say like, yeah, I just drove by a billboard. I looked at it, twice. I just want to confess that and be open about it, and I got to get it out.
What I find so inspiring about your situation is that you've gone through the dark valley. You've come back out. I mean, it's a very unorthodox pathway. You've gone through divorce, remarriage. I mean, just so challenging. And yet you've come back to God. You've fought for your sobriety. But now you're into coaching. Now you're into helping others. Can you talk a little bit about that and what you're doing?
Yeah. So after about 9 months of sobriety, the folks that were helping us and coaching us, I guess my 30 years of being a disciple kind of paid off a bit, leading house churches and Bible talks, and they kind of noticed that when I would because the difference in our recovery groups that we have through coaching is that we allow feedback. You go to a 12-step program, they don't allow any crosstalk or feedback, and so you can share and get everything out, but nobody ever says anything back to you. So in the recovery groups, though, we disciple each other. We give each other feedback and like, bro, I noticed that you haven't got any meetings and haven't been making any phone calls, and kind of sounds like you're isolating, So anyway, so I would share and give feedback, and so our coaches were like, man, you're really great talking to people, Jeff. And I know you're pretty bored with the accounting work you're doing. Have you ever thought about doing this coaching stuff, And I'm like, well, not really. And we looked into the program that they had, and it's all laid out. It's just a great program, and it helped me to get sober. And I'm like, my wife started encouraging me. She's like, Jeff, you're so good at talking to people, and I think you'd be really good at this, and you really should think about it. And financially, we're in a good place, and we have a good income source, and so we have the ability to go for it, So I quit my accounting job. We started studying through AASAT, became certified coaches, went through this program, and we're under mentorship right now with Dr. Doug Weiss. We get on the phone with him once a week, and with about 10 other therapists, and we all kind of bring cases and talk about case studies, and it's really great. And we also studied through the Arizona Trauma Institute to learn a little bit more about trauma and get certified there. And now we're also studying through the Gottman method, talking to families about, more on the healthy side of how to have a good marriage, right? So we're just trying to soak up and learn as much as we can. And so that's what we decided to do. So my wife was super supportive. We decided to go for it. So yeah, we have a company called Loving Wings Recovery. And it's been amazing. We're still fairly new in it, but we're getting some traction.
Well, let's say a person's listening and they go, man, I'd really like to find out more. Maybe they're not totally ready to commit, but just want to talk or get some advice. How would they reach you?
Yeah. So I think the best way is just to go to my website.
What's the website?
We need some more hits on there. So I'm going to plug it, lovingwingsrecovery.com. So in our wedding we had Dave Matthews does a song called Loving Wings.
Wow.
It's awesome. You guys should listen to it. But so we kind of stole his little song title there. And lovingwingsrecovery.com, and there's a contact us buttons everywhere, and just shoot me an email from there. And then what's really great, and what I offered to all the brothers at the conference is, for me, it's not really about the money. This is now have become a little bit more my mission, my purpose, to help others. And so I love talking to guys. I'd be glad to talk to anybody and not charge them anything. So I told these guys, call me up. I can get you started, get you into a 12-step program, no cost for that. If people do want some additional help and they feel like, they're married and their wife's kind of going through it and they just need a little bit more help, then I do individual sessions. And so we charge just like a counselor would. But I also offer a sliding scale for disciples and folks that need a little more help financially. So it's not really about the money. The other part that we do, so we do individual sessions. My wife does individual sessions with the spouses. And then we also have these recovery groups. The recovery groups are great. We cap them at 8 people. We call in once a week. We have a very rigid program that we go through, and we track activity and behavior. Behavior is very important, doesn't matter how you feel. It's like, what did you do? How many meetings did you go to? How many did you pray in the morning? Did you pray in the evening? Did you make phone calls? How many did you make? Some things like that. So we check in on that. We have some open sharing, and then we provide feedback. We kind of help each other in a loving way, just to stay healthy. And we check in with our sobriety date. So those recovery groups are great. We meet once a week, and then I think that's about it. Yeah,
That's awesome.
Yeah, we have couple sessions too for like married couples as well. So
right. Well, looking back, Jeff, I mean, it's an amazing story. What advice would you give to a person who wants to make this life count, but feels really burdened by their struggle with purity?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I can relate. And I think the thing that I was thinking about is it's important to find people around you that have gone through what you've gone through and have come out the other side. Mm-hmm. And so that is one of the benefits of going to the 12-step program is you're going to meet a lot of people that have been there. And, there's a lot of people in the 12-step program that are relapsing, and you can hear their stories and be like, man, I don't want to be like that. I want to be sober. Mm-hmm. But you got guys that are hitting 6 months sobriety or 9 months sobriety or a year sobriety, or this other guy I know the first time I was in the program, he stayed sober, and now he just got his 8-year chip. And wow. I'm like, oh man, I could have been 8 years, I got 1 year, but, which I'm fired up about,
Amen.
But, so you have guys that have been ahead of you, and they can relate to you. All our stories are unique and different, but we can identify with each other.
Right.
I know what you're going through,
right?
Because I've been there. So that's the thing about sexual addiction in the church is you can feel super alone, because everybody else is doing so great spiritually. They're crushing it. And here I am, acting out every 2 months, and it can feel really lonely, and isolating. And so, sometimes God works outside the church. And for me, that's it. I had to go somewhere else and find people who knew how to deal with this, who knew how to help me out of this problem. So
that's awesome.
That's the biggest thing I encourage people to do is find, and there are disciples who are, and there's a lot of disciples who have overcome this as well. I know Dave Widener's in Idaho. He's doing great work, helping people and I kind of dabbled in that a little bit for a while the first time I was in recovery, and then I kind of just blew it off. And so, but he's a good guy and he's helping a lot of people. So there are disciples and there are programs out there. I just encourage people to try to find them.
That's right. Jeff, thanks so much for the time.
Thank you, Rob. This has been great just to share my story. I appreciate you and love you a lot.
Love you too. Thanks for listening. Here's how you can help support the program. First, let your friends know about the podcast. That's how people find out about the podcast. There are so many out there. It really helps when one disciple tells another, hey, you should listen to this podcast. It's really encouraged me. Secondly, read and review one of my books, either How to Plant and Grow a Church or Courage, How to Make This Life Count. You can find them both on Amazon.com. And finally, just support the program with a gift today. The link is in the show notes. It's super easy to do because my goal is to inspire you to make this life count, live a no-regrets life, and multiply disciples, leaders, and churches. Have a great day and an amazing Christmas, and make this life count.